Hello, it is Sunday, the 6th of April, and in the last 4 hours, we've seen a pretty nasty shakeout in crypto. I thought I'd take a look at it and explain about margin selling and why that potentially could see another big shakeout today. Not sure if it'll last, but certainly margin selling is one of those things that kind of adds to market fragility and volatility in market downturns. So, particularly if the market has got quite over leveraged, as you often see in kind of later stages of bull markets, if you like. I'm not going to say this is bull market is over yet, but I have to say that with so many markets underneath the 200-day moving average, really nothing good happens underneath the 200-day moving average until you recover it. So we are in a little bit of a shaky place. So if we take a look at the last 4 hours as we head into the Sunday Open, we've seen some pretty nasty moves, not just in Bitcoin, but even more amplified moves in altcoins. Solana down 10%, Ethereum down 10%. So it's looking pretty nasty out there. So let's explain about margin calls. So this is not people buying crypto on margin, but an awful lot of hedge funds now have crypto positions, and they may or may not have bought on margin. But certainly in stock markets, we have seen a huge increase in margin positions, and so I just wanted to take a look at that. If we take a look, this is a measure of in the S&P 500 and margin debt across all positions. So we can see actually that made a little bit of a top in 2021, and then we had a pretty nasty shakeout. I think it was Archegos that went down, and that we saw really nasty margin selling after that hedge fund had to liquidate, and that kind of tends to happen. It was a big factor in amplified selling in 2000 and in 2008, because we would have a really big down day, markets would end on the lows, and then these clients that had margin positions would have to increase their position the following morning, so they would sell, and that increased the volatility. And one of the things they say about when you have to sell for a margin position is quite often you have to sell what you can and not what you want to, and that is how some people have explained why we saw such nasty sell-offs in gold the last couple of days. And I don't think people wanted to sell gold. I think people were selling gold the last 2 days because they could sell it quickly and it was worth a lot, and they didn't want to sell other positions at the loss. But if we take, this is the S&P cash, and you can see on Friday we closed right down at these lows, and people, there were big margin calls on Friday morning for what had happened on Thursday. And so given that this is what happened on Friday, we could see that amplified today. Normally I would say, if Jim Cramer is on Twitter warning you about a big down day in the markets, I would normally say that that's quite a bullish signal. But I just want to say be careful, because margin selling kind of amplifies it, and it could be that the selling that we have seen today is maybe partly to do with those margin calls. So let's take a look at where we are in Bitcoin, and I'm going to go to a weekly chart of Bitcoin, and you can see, on a weekly, we're not in a bad place at all. We've pulled back to the weekly 50 moving average, which, and we're trading sideways at it. We haven't broken it. For me, we're still holding the support of this sideways range that we've basically been in since mid-February and since the inauguration. As I said before, each one of these swings previously, we've had really decent 50% pullbacks and continued to trend higher. And if I put my fibs back on, let's not look at those, but just this most recent swing, you can see we've been trading sideways at this 50% from this low that we made in August 2024 when the Fed pivoted and pretty much everything bounced. And so we're holding this really interesting 50% retrace, which would mean the same as really kind of every other pullback since we made this low back in 2022. We haven't pulled back more than 50% until we have finished. So we could hold this low, shake out, maybe that margin selling is done. I have to say though, tomorrow could be a little bit dodgy and could go either way, and it could be, and it's nothing to do with Bitcoin or whether people want to hold Bitcoin or not. It could be to do with margin selling in other markets because we had such a big down day on Friday. So where do we go if we don't? Well, if this whole 5-wave swing, it's potentially, we've seen a completed 5-wave swing from this low, and this could be this 5th wave complete, in which case we're going to pull back to the bottom of here, and we could very easily pull back towards 50,000 if that's the case. However, as you know, I said before, there is a possibility that this is just kind of wave 1 of an extended wave 5. People have said, why did Bitcoin hold up so well last week in margin sell? If that's the case, with all this margin selling going on, and why did it hold up better than gold the last couple of days? And I actually think, we heard about GameStop buying a big Bitcoin position. It may be that what we have seen for this last week or so, whilst we've been trading sideways and above this 50% retrace, a lot of that buying, we could say, potentially was GameStop. And at some point, they'll have bought it all, and then potentially the selling may outweigh the buying. So if we close underneath this 50% level, which is at 79,285 here in spot markets, you can see we had a look under this level before and we regained it. I think it would be if we dropped sharply underneath this and couldn't get back above it, or back tested it and then continued lower, then obviously the next stop is going to be the 61.8 fib retrace, which is down at 72,000. And potentially, if we go all the way out and we look at this big swing from this low, that 72,000 level is also around where our 38.2 fib is. So I would say if we get stuck underneath 79,000, 72,000 next. But really, I think from this big low to high, for me, I prefer this 62,000 level. So I think, that's the bigger 50% of this whole swing. I think if we get underneath there and it gets really nasty, that's one of the levels where I wouldn't mind leaving a blind order. So that's what I'm looking at. So let's talk about why I think there's a possibility that this isn't a high, and this from this low in August 2024 is just wave 1 of 5. And I've said this before, in a trending market or when wave 3, the swings don't pull back into the previous swing, they are separate. But quite often in a wave 5, you'll see a pattern more like this, or more choppy and overlapping, where they kind of do this, and you'll see deep retraces. And actually I've drawn this badly because the most common retrace in this kind of overlapping ending diagonal pattern is a 786 fib retrace. And so that means if we look at this swing that we've made, and if this is the start of a wave 1 of 5 instead of a complete 5th wave, then the 786 fib, which if we draw it in here, let's put it down here, is down there also at that 62,000 level. So that 62,000 level is 50% from the lows here in November 2022, and it's also the 786 fib of this most recent swing. So it's possible it could get really ugly, and it doesn't mean it's all over. It's just a really nasty shakeout, and margin selling to fulfill margin calls could exacerbate this volatility and what we see going on here. So again, I have to say, nothing good happens underneath this 200-day moving average, which unfortunately, we've been trading sideways at. But if we start losing these support levels, that's where I'm going to be looking to buy. And let's take a look at a couple of other markets that I know people are anxious about. Let's take a look, for example, at Solana. A really big level in Solana. If we go to the weekly, a big 61.8 fib level, and that's also where this previous low is. And this is one of those Sunday nights where underneath this level, I was looking for us to bounce in a kind of bigger 3-wave move from here. You can see this 112 level, really interesting support and resistance, really decent bounce off it, but we got to the first target, but we couldn't get to the second target. Now, if this is going to be a false breakdown, I expect, you know, and this is one of kind of those early open nasty shakeout false breakdowns, we need to recover 112.69 in Solana, and then I think that we could retest the highs of this sideways range. But if we get stuck or this 112.69 becomes resistance, I'm afraid this is headed lower as well in Solana. And for me, you know, in terms of fib retrace levels, there's a bit of bounce, support and resistance level around 88, but I think more likely we are back to 63, which that's a long way from here. So be careful. You're wondering, people, if you're wondering where I've drawn the fibs from in Solana, I've drawn it from 0 because it's a number, and because, you know, you don't always have the full history. And you can see that these fib levels going from 0 in Solana have worked really textbook perfect. So that's why I'm using that in this one. So 112, really important support and resistance level in Ripple, which has also had a really nasty, I think 6% in the last 4 hours. And let's put regular candles and take a look at this one. This for me is a really interesting third touch of this. You know, we could argue that this is in a kind of wedge triangle support level, and this is testing really important support here around this 2 level. We're underneath it now, I think 1995 or something. Quite often you can draw this as a bullish pennant and you're looking for 5 waves inside of it, and it ends up breaking down and becoming a flag pattern, in which case the parallel, you need a parallel. This top is where you end up finding support if this breaks down from this triangle pattern here, which for me would mean as well, if I measure the swings and Ripple from this high to this low and project it from here, the key support is 2.02 in Ripple. That's what we need to regain. You can see here on the daily several times we've looked underneath this level, but on the daily we've closed back above it. So 2.02 is what I want to see hold. Otherwise, I think we retest the lows here at 1.84. That would likely be a bounce. And if we drop down, that might be where we kind of, that's our Hail Mary level, if you like, where we could catch and recover. If we do recover, we need to recover 2.202 in Ripple. And we can then draw potentially this as a horizontal support level, potentially with this low here around here. But if we don't, unfortunately, or if we get stuck underneath in Ripple, if we get stuck underneath 2.02, then I'm afraid the path of least resistance again is lower, and 1.39 is where the equal measured move correction will be from the high that we made in January in this. So this would be A, B, C equal moves down, 1.39 next. Sorry, my dog is making himself comfortable. And unfortunately, you know, that's where we are. I think, you know, ETH has very clearly shown what happens when you lose a support and resistance level. Here, I'm going to zoom out to the weekly. I've got huge big fib levels all the way from the lows 0 all the way to the high that we made in November 2021. We pulled back to the 786, bounced up here, and here we are in the middle. And I'm keeping these levels up because they seem to be kind of working really neatly as support and resistance. And you can see here, if that's the case, certainly we got underneath it, and here we are continuing lower. But let's do it the other way and say, let's remove these and just put them on the weekly here as simple retrace levels, in which case we go from this low to this high. And here, this is the swing that we're inside of, and this then makes it maybe a little bit more interesting, because we've got one of those bigger 786 fib levels here coming up at 1.567. I'd like to see if we hold that, and in fact I'm looking at it slightly wrong, and that is the next place then I think that we maybe likely bounce. And if we put in the other fib levels in this, you can see this 61.8 here in the middle was pretty interesting support and resistance, and here found support from it, got underneath it, it was resistance. So that's where our next level comes up, 1.567 in ETH US dollar. a lot of the other charts, you know, so many altcoins are getting really badly hurt by this, and even the ones that yeah, everything is having a bad day, and I think it could well be to do with, you know, even ones kind of rock solid that I've been looking for bottoming patterns. Like Curve is one of the ones that I've been looking for a bottoming pattern. Clearly, you know, we're not anywhere near the lows that we were at the start of March, but I'd like to see an inverted head and shoulders pattern or something like that here. Otherwise, I'm afraid path of least resistance in all of these is lower. And this margin selling in, if we do the same thing again on Monday in stocks, that doesn't mean that we're going to turn around Tuesday, because again, we could see more of that. So let me know if there's a chart that you're looking at, and I'll cover it.